producing these platelet factor growth factors, and these are very important role into, right? And then obviously they also require like some of the clotting factors now. And you know this, what is the role of serotonin, right? That what happens, serotonin comes to smooth muscle cell and it does a constriction, just like a thromboxane, it does that, right? And we'll talk about what is calcium, what is ADP does, all right? So now, whole idea here is that we talked about this, I'll keep in this touch. Really what happens is that, let me erase this, right? Like what happens is that, if I talk about this, my platelet right here, right? Remember what I talked about, this platelet has this complex like GP, right? 2B, and then 3A, right? Complex, and all this protein all these platelets has, right? GP, 2B, and then 3A complex. Remember like this endothelius, where's this platelets? It was hooked here, right? And there another one was hooked here, let me just say. And this is called platelet adhesion process, right? So really what happens, remember the reactions from platelets, they release like ADP, all right? This ADP, really what happens is that, when they are this floating around, really what happens is, these platelets were inactivated, like this platelet was sleeping because the receptors were not activated. But as soon as what really happens is that, when the ADP touches the adenosine diphosphate, not phosphatase, from the health, what happens is that whenever this touches this, it gets activated. This gets activated, and then even this gets activated, right? So when they're touched, and then when they get activated, what happens? They start coming down, right? All this coming down together, and then on the influence of ADP, they started like binding together. Look at this, like this, all right? And all these platelets come and started binding together like this. That's what these guys do. All right, these guys are do, and this is very important role, because remember, guys, there are some, sometimes there's drugs is given which is called ADP inhibitors, like some of the drugs, like one of the drugs is called Plavix. All right, or one is called ticlopidine. That's a drug name. All right, there's a given for this. These are adenosine diphosphate inhibitors, right? There are also some of the drugs that is actually given for this complex to be inhibited, and those are some of those drugs. The glycoprotein, or like AB, it's called AB. C max is given for that one, right? And there's also another drug that is also given for this one. It's called tirofiban. It's called tirofiban. That's also given for that. These are like inhibitors of these proteins, right? So when these guys are when they're coming together, and when the platelets is binding with the platelets, when the platelets, look, platelet is bound to this, platelet is bound to this one, this one, this. So this process is called platelet aggregator. Okay, when the platelets is binding with one another, and then a lot of this platelet coming together and forming that, this is called primary plaque, or we can call them primary hemostatic plaque. That's what we call this, right? So this process is called primary hemostatic plaque. It's a loose plaque right now. All right. So this is what's happening here now. Now remember, we talked about the guys, like these guys also release like a lot of this clotting factors, and there's a lot of clotting factors. Where is the guys? The clotting factors are coming from. These clotting factors are a lot of these clotting factors are produced by the liver, right? What happens is that as this factor come in, all right, what happens is that let me make this in a blue. What happens is that this certain clotting factor comes in, and then whenever it touches and whenever it passes with it from the blood, it passes, this guy gets activated, right? And the first one is called my factor number. Actually, before even we talked about this, let's talk about extrinsic pathway. Okay, let me write this as intrinsic pathway right here. So let me just, this is intrinsic pathway and extrinsic pathway. And we'll also talk about what is this. All right, extrinsic pathway. What is the difference between extrinsic and intrinsic pathway? Okay, extrinsic is usually caused from like trauma or like from the outside of injury, right? And extrinsic pathway is rapid. It happens very fast, all right? And usually like 11 to 13 seconds or so. Intrinsic pathway is slow, it takes time, right? It takes time, and it's a lure, and then that usually, if there's internal flow problems, the internal like turbulent flow that is causing problems, then usually intrinsic pathway get activated, all right? Now, if we start from the, let's say, if we start from the NTZ path really. So really what happens is that this factor, this clotting factors, as they come in, when they touch this platelets, what happens is they get activated. And the first factor that comes in here is called your factor number 12, right? Factor number, let me write this as a factor number 12, all right? And what is the factor number 12? What is the name of it? These factors, we call them, I'm going to write it down here, guys. You have to remember this. It's called Hagman factor. It's called Hagman factor. Or they're also given as a contact factor. Contact factor given there. They're also called glass factor. I don't know why. All right. And then one of the things that you have to remember is, I think you should remember is, they also said anti-hemophilic, or okay, it's called anti-hemophilic factor number D. Okay, I want you to remember this. All right. So when these guys come here, what happens is that when they touch it here, what happens? These guys, factor number 12, get activated. Look, now, what is going to happen? Once factor number 12 gets activated, right, what's going to happen? This factor number 12, it's activated these guys right here. Let me write this down. Okay, let me write it down in the, okay, let me write it in black. This factor number activated is your factor number 11, guys. All right, and what is factor number 11? What is the name for the factor number 11, guys? It's going to be my plasma. Okay, let me write it down in the black, actually. It's called plasma, all right, thromboplastin, also called antecedent, all right, or you can simply say PTA. Or there's another name, which I want you to remember this one, which is going to be anti-hemophilic C. I want you to remember that. All right, guys? Now, this factor number, what happens is this factor number 11 is going to get activated now. All right? Now, look, factor number 12 activates, this activate factor number 12 activates factor number 11, right? So 11 is active. When the factor number 11 is activated, what happens? Does it going to activate factor number 10? No. It's going to activate factor number 9, guys. It's going to activate factor number, what is going to activate? Factor number 9. And what is our factor number 9? All right, again, I'm going to write down, okay, let me write this down as this is activated now. Look, I'm not going to write this. Actually, no, let me write it. Let me do this properly. So this is going to be 9, right? And what is the name of the 9, guys? Let me write down the black color here for you guys. 9 is going to be, look, it's going to be Christmas factor, they say. All right, Christmas factor. All right. There's also another name is given for that one. What is this? All right, but I want you to remember this one though. It's anti-hemophilic factor number, factor, it's going to be your B. All right, I want you to remember this. And then now, your factor number 9 is activated. All right, now, this factor number 9, all right, has a pathway. What is it going to do? It's going to activate, all right, this factor number 9 is going to activate what? Your factor, this factor number 9, let me write it down here. This factor number 9 is going to activate your factor number, let's say factor number 10 here. Okay, now let me put it right down here. It's going to activate your factor number 10. All right, and what is factor number 10? It's going to be, okay, let's name the factor number 10. What is factor number 10? Factor number is called what? It's called STUAR, stored power factor, they're called. All right, there's a name of this. I don't know why, who gave this name. It's called stored power factors. Or there's another name, it's called thrombokinase as well. Thrombokinase as well, right? Now, all right, whenever the factor number 9 wants to activate factor, but they require certain things though. What are they requires? This is very, very important concept. They require calcium, and then you need to be in the phospholipase, because this is happening in the phospholipase surface, all right? And they also requires, like your platelet derived number 3 is required, and then they obviously require your factor number 8, all right? And what is factor number 8? Factor number 8 is very, very important enzyme, right? This factor is called, we can say this as a anti-hemophilic A, all right? Or there is another name is given for the factor number 8, which is also going to be what? Anti-hemophilic or anti-hemophilic globulin, you can call that too, right? This factor number. And remember, there's calcium. And what calcium does? Calcium helps. What calcium does is the calcium is able to bring the one factors and then other factor, and then they're able to like combine one another, right? So they help with the binding. But remember, calcium is only able to bring those factors together and help with the binding if those factors are carboxylated in the glutamic residue. Okay, what does that mean? Usually what it means is calcium is like what is a cation, right? It's positive charged molecule is really what happens. And then the carboxylation is like C with a C double minus, right? On the glutamic residue, that's what it is. And then in order to get carboxylated, okay, what helps is your vitamin K. That's why vitamin K is required for this, okay? In the presence of vitamin K, okay, so vitamin K helps the carboxylated at the carboxylated with the carboxyl percent at the glutamic residue. So that way, what happens is the calcium is able to interact with them and able to bind and able to hide the binding. That's what calcium does, all right? And calcium is very, very important and required for the clotting factor. Without calcium, they would not able to clot. All right, and the vitamin K is very, very important and essential for this one, which is for the carboxylation position. That's what I want you guys to remember. And remember that like certain drugs like warfarin works there, all right? So that's one thing that I wanted to make that very clear to you guys. Okay, then after that, factor number 10 is activated, really. The factor number activated is gonna, on the presence of obviously calcium, you know, they're gonna activate something called prothrombin, right? And this is going to be like my factor number what? Factor number 2, right? Prothrombin, but remember, in order to activate the prothrombin, you need like prothrombinase too, like prothrombinase, right? Or this is also called prothrombinase activator, right? This also requires for that, right? The calcium, all right? And then obviously they require phospholipase here too, right? Phospholipase, because it requires a platelet factors number, platelet factors, let's say PF here, and let's say PF here too. Platelet factor number 3 is required for you. And important, you need a factor number 5 is required here too, guys. This 5 is, let me write down the number, it's 5. What is 5? This 5 is, what is the role of 5? 5 is called labile factor, okay? Labile factor, or they also call proaccelerant, that's called, right? And then from the prothrombin, what is going to happen is this guy is going to activate thrombin, THRO thrombin, right? This is what I do. And then thrombin has two work. Thrombin is going to activate, what does is that thrombin is going to convert fibrinogen, okay, which is insoluble, right, into what? Insoluble fibrin monomer, guys. It's going to be fibrin monomer, right? And then this thrombin also does one more thing. What it does is that it's going to activate TSFF, which is a factor number 13, okay, which is a tissue stabilizing factor. This is very important, guys, because whenever this insoluble fibrin is, the monomers are formed, what happens is it started, like now if I have to make, let me make this in a green. Oh, actually, let me make this in a red. No, let me make this in a blue. So what happens is that with the insoluble fibrin monomers, they started putting the fibrins like this, okay, like thread like a structure like this, all right? Now, as soon as when the thrombin that activates the tissue stabilizing factor. These guys, what happened is that it does is stabilizing this. It started creating like a network of like the mesh network like this, right? Meshwork like this, and then a lot of red blood cells, platelets are kind of trapped into it. So these is called thrombus, like this is called clot now. All right. So these guys helps with like TSLI, tissue stabilizing factors. They help with the forming of the like insoluble fibrin of meshwork, or you can also say insoluble fibrin of polymers. You can say that too. That's what these guys do, right? TSF does that now. See, so far we talked about this is the intrinsic pathway of doing it, right? That's what it is. Now, if I have to talk about my extrinsic pathway, now let's just quickly. What happens is that, you know, the extrinsic pathway is so important because you have to remember, guys, the damage, the endothelial cells, they produce this factor, which is a tissue factor, okay, which is a factor number 3, okay, and that's also called thromboplastin, okay. This tissue factor, what happens is that, let's say from the ear, this comes, and then really, let me just write down, this tissue factor is going to go contact, and the damaged cells produce us, right? And let me write down this tissue factor, right? And what this tissue factor does is, this tissue factor activates like factor number 7. And what is our factor number 7 is? Our factor number 7 is what? It's a stable factor, we call this, right? We call this stable factor, right? And this is factor number 7, right? Factor number 7 is a stable factor, or we also call them as a pro-convertin, all right? It's called pro-convertin, right? And this factor number 7, when this gets activated, really what happens, it can, look, what it does is that on the presence of calcium again, guys, it can go to 2 ways. One is going to be, let me write it down in the, like red. One, it can go and start from like 10, all right? And then activate. And obviously, in order to do that, you need also the prothrombinase if you want to do, or also it can go use this pathway from like factor number 9, all right? So from this one, like intrinsic pathway up to like factor number 9, what happens, all this is, but then from the factor number 7 also go and can actually stimulate and start activating like the factor number 9 and factor number 10, factor number 9, simply like you could just say factor number 10, and from there what happens is this becomes common pathway. They both intrinsic and extrinsic pathway share common pathway from like, factor number 9, I guess, in this case, or you could even say factor number 10 from there, all right? And this prothrombinase is important, guys. Prothrombinase is different than prothrombin because prothrombinase is an activator of prothrombin, all right? Which helps to activate prothrombin to thrombin. And thrombin, what it does is thrombin converts fibrinogen into insoluble fibrin monomers, and that creates the thread-like, more like a thread-like structure in here. And then this tissue factor, they create a meshwork of this, all right? This is what it is called, right? Now we talked about the tissue factor, we talked about all these factors, and these are important, guys. Because a lot of times I hear like, I know there are a lot of names I said it here, like this prothrombin is going to be factor number 2, all right? Like, if you don't want to remember like all these names, you don't have to, but I feel like it's important that you should see it. But definitely, guys, remember this anti-hemophilic factor number D for like factor number like 12. Definitely remember this anti-hemophilic like A, which is a factor number 8, and anti-hemophilic B, which is factor 9, because that deficiency, there's a clinical pathology related to this. That's why I want you guys to remember this, all right? That's some of the stuff. Now, one of the things I'm going to talk about, I often hear like everyone's talking about, what is the concept of like, let's say, like prothrombin time, right? Like, what is the concept of prothrombin time? Let me quickly talk about that too. So what happens is that what's prothrombin time, right? Prothrombin time. Usually whenever we talk about the prothrombin time, we're talking about, let's not get confused with this one. So we're talking about extrinsic pathway when you talk about prothrombin time, all right? Whenever we talk about, let's say, like a partial thromboplastin time, like this is a, like PTT, a partial thromboplastin time, right? So when we talk about this as an intrinsic pathway, right? All right. So when we talk about the partial thromboplastin time, we talk about the intrinsic pathway, and prothrombin time is basically referred to the extrinsic pathway. And what happens? How do they? What is the mechanisms of this prothrombin? Really what happens is that, guys, when you take the blood, they take the blood out in the hospitals, in the labs, what they do is they take the blood out, right? And what they do is like, they put in this tube, right? And when they put in the tube, really what happens is that a lot of these red blood cells comes out down here, right? The red blood cells comes out here. And then obviously there's a buffy coat and this plasma, right? There's a lot. And then what happens is they take this plasma out, right? And they take plasma out, and what they do is like they put in another container right here. And you just have a plasma in this another container right here, right? Okay, let me just put in the plasma right here. And then when they have a plasma, and here, let's say this put in a plasma, right? Usually plasma is yellowish fluid, and then what happens is that, like when the plasma is there, they add some certain chemicals. Like they add like sodium citrate, all right? Or sometimes they also add like sodium oxalate, oxalate, or sometimes they also add this EDTA, what is this? Ethylene, diamine, tetraacetic acid. They add that. And what do they do? What they do is that they precipitate calciums, or they chelate calciums in order to prevent, so that way it doesn't clot. Okay, so prevent of like spontaneous clotting, they add this, and the sodium citrate, citrate or sodium oxalated, what they do is they chelate the calcium. All right, that's what it does. And then after that, what these guys do is like they add, obviously here, because I'm talking proton time, what they add is here is they add phospholipase, because remember this all this is having a phospholipase, right? And then they add tissue factor, you guys. It's tissue factor is very important because it is telling about the extrinsic pathway, right? And after that they add calcium here. And then when they add calcium, they start timing it. And when they start timing it, it takes how long does it how long does it form? How long does it take to clot? The formations of clot. That's what these guys, that's what they do, right? The time. That's how you know that how long does it take to form the clot. And usually in average it should take about 11 to 13 seconds, all right? That's what usually the normal timing for the extrinsic pathway, because it's rapid and fast. And then let me quickly talk about this, some other concept called like INR. What is the concept of INR? Which is basically means international, okay, normalized ratio. What does that mean? Which is basically means is that whatever this person has, right? So the proton time of this, let's say proton time of that patient, let me write down patient here, with INR, which is basically means is the international normalized ratio, and that is only using for that they only use for extrinsic pathway. They do not use for intrinsic pathway. What they do is they find the like normal standards percent, okay, of the person, right? And then they divide. Let's say this person is like, let's say 2 here. I mean, actually that's too high, but let's just say there's a 1 here. And then let's say that my proton time for this person is like let's say 3, and then divide by 3. What is this? The number comes at 3, right? What does that tells you? That tells you that it is slowing coagulating, okay, taking longer time to coagulate, right? Which means that there is a heavy bleeding is going on. That's what this INR number tells you, because normal INR is about like from 0.9 to like 1.3, or that's what it is. So any number that comes below 0.9, that tells you that there's a rapid, the formation of clot is very, very fast. So that way, like in your blood, you probably have a lot of, like, you know, if you're exercising, if you're doing some work, you probably have like clotting is forming, you know, clotting is forming. That's what the less than 0.9 tells you. If you have, and if you have more than 1.3, that means like, you know, that means you would have uncontrolled bleeding. That's what this INR, international normalized ratio, tells you, right? This is just wanted to tell you guys about what this INR or like what this proton time basically means. And other concept here is like, okay, we also talk about intrinsic property of which is the partial partial this thromboplastin time, right? And with this also, guys, I mean, let me just erase this, guys, all right? So what they do, they do the same thing here, right? Nothing much different. Like what they do is, again, they put what they do is that they take the blood out, right? And then they put it in the centrifuge and they take the plasma, right? And then in the plasma, what happens is that they add like the sodium citrate and all, right? So the or ethylene diamine tetraacetic acid too, right? So that way to chelate the calcium, right? Then after what happens is that they will add, again, they add phospholipase. But in this case, they do not add they do not add tissue factor. What they add is they add some kind of contact factor, like glass factors, right? Like silica or something like that, right? They add something like that because we're talking about intrinsic pathway, all right? We're not talking about extrinsic pathway. And then they add calcium. And when they add calcium, what happens is that they time it. Okay, when they time it, and it then it depends on how long does it takes the time to form a clot. Will tell you that it is going to be the intrinsic or extrinsic, right? And usually for this one, it's about like 25 to like 25 to like 35 seconds is like usually it considers a normal time, right? And remember, intrinsic pathway usually leads into like if there's some like turbulent flow or like some intrinsic way of properties of like, you know, somehow the endothelial cells become dysfunctional, right? And it could be because of hypercoagulability. Remember, there's any problems with this pathway that could lead to coagulation too, and that tells you about your a partial thromboplastin time, right? Now, that is something that I wanted to talk about. Now after this, I wanted to talk about some simple concept here, guys. You know, what is there's something like what is clot retraction means, right? let's talk about clot retractions. What does that mean? What is the concept of clot retraction means, right? And we also have to talk about the fibrinolysis. What does that mean, right? So basically, clot retraction basically means, remember, when the clot is formed right here, like there's a lot of red blood cells here, a lot of platelets are trapped into there, right? A lot of like red blood cells and all this, they're trapped into, right? Like this, what is happening to them? This is called dissolution process, right? And like what happens is that when the clots are formed, really what happens is that from there, little bit serums like structures are going to, like when they're clotting, when they're contracting or they're coming together, what happens is that little serum like structures, like serum will come out from there, right? And as I said, serum is not a clotting factor. And when they come together, this is like, the clot retraction basically is if you want to remember simply, it's the tightening of this, okay? Tightening of this meshwork. When the tightening of the meshwork, really what happens is that, remember, this endothelius right now, there's a space of endothelius, right? They come together, and we want that to happen too, in order for the further damage of these blood vessels, and that's what is happening here with this clot retraction process. All right, that's the whole idea of this called clot retractions. Now, there's another concept of like we have to talk about that concept is going to be fibrinolysis, right? What does that mean? What does that mean? Of like, let's say you're talking about this whole idea of fibrinolysis, right? The fibrinolysis basically means it's the process of breakdown, the product of coagulation. The process of breakdown of this process of coagulation, right? And how do we break this down with the fibrinolysis? So really what happens is that this fibrinolysis goes down into very, very important concept. You have to remember this. What happens is that this activated healthy endothelial cells produce, because really what happens here around here is there's this thing called plasminogen. All right, it's always like floating around there, right? So what happens is that these healthy activated endothelial cells right here produces, this is called TPA, tissue plasminogen activator. All right. We're talking about the fibrinolysis, all right? We're talking about the I don't know how to spell this, but lysis means like breaking down something, right? That's what it is. Fibrinolysis, actually, that's what we call it. Right? There's a process of breaking this meshwork of the clot. That's what we're trying to do. What happens with TPA, whenever the activated healthy endothelial produces, what happens is it gets a close contact with the plasminogen and it converts plasminogen into plasmin. All right, and the plasmin is you can give this plasmin is also called what, fibrolysine, or you can call it fibrolysine. All right, and this plasmin is like a cutter. What it does, it's a cut. It kind of like cuts the fibrin, like this polymers or like the meshwork of this fibrin. It cuts down. It breaks down and cuts down from the multiple places, and it breaks down this meshwork, this clot. Okay, that's what it does. So it clots plasma, clots all this, the fibrin polymers and all those monomers from like different parts, right? So when this breaks down all this, like the meshwork from the various places, like by cutting fibrin, what happens is that now it cuts all this fibrin and all, right? So then those fibrins started getting circulating in the blood, right? And what happens to that? The this fibrin, they have to go out of the system, right? So what happens is the proteolysis occurs, right? And also like what happens, they get excreted from your kidneys and your liver. That's what usually happens with this tissue plasminogen activates plasminogen, which activates plasmin, and the plasmin cuts the fibrin molecules, right? And that is the whole process called fibrinolysis. All right, that's what it is. Now, let me quickly mention you about something called Embolus. What is Embolus? That's also, let me quickly talk about that. The whole concept of Embolus, all right, let me write this Embolus down here. All right, Embolus, right? What is this concept of? And really what happens is sometimes, when the clot formed, right? The clot is formed in order to prevent the blood rise, right? So really what happens is that sometimes when the clot forms, and then it detaches. Sometimes this clot, because of blood flow or something, it detaches, right? So when it detaches, what really happens is that those clots started circulating, and it reaches the lungs, right? And when it reaches the lungs, your lungs, the circulatory system is very slow systems, right? So because of clot, what happens is that it gets lost into lungs, okay? And if it gets lost into lungs, we call that as pulmonary embolisms. Okay, that's what I wanted to make that clear to you. You know, guys, we talked a lot about it, but you know, I forgot to mention something very important, guys. You know, that is the concept. You know, whenever there's a vascular, whenever there are cuts or some damage endothelial cells happens, you know, first thing happens is that, you know, I went and started talking about the VWF and all that stuff. But the first steps that happens is something called vascular spasm happens, all right? Let me quickly talk about this to you guys, and then hopefully you can tie back into this. Like first thing whenever this clot happens is something called vascular spasm happens. All right, let me just write down this. Vascular spasm. What does that mean is that whenever the clot, there's a nearby nerve endings, and then what happens is healthy endothelial cells, what happens, it releases this thing called endothelin, right? And the endothelin goes to these circular muscles, and it causes contraction, okay? Contractions. That's what it does. And the other one is like this. Because they are circular smooth muscle cells, right? They also respond to that, all right? And they also do myogenic reflex, all right? The myogenic reflex, which you call that, they can also like constrict and reduce the diameters of the blood vessels. So that way, they will do further preventions of the blood loss, which is called myogenic reflex, all right? And other one is called like neurogenic reflex, which basically means is that they are like around here. There's nearby nerve endings are there, okay? And because that, like whenever the healthy endothelium comes, they get constrict. They constrict. That's called neurogenic reflex, right? And that's also one of the way of like preventing the blood loss. These are the stuff that usually happens first, the vascular spasms, and then after that, this healthy endothelial cells will produce like a VWF, right? And then from the VWF, platelets come and bind together, and then this process starts, okay? But this is the first steps that usually happens. I forgot to mention this. I'm so sorry about that, but this is usually happens the first thing, and I want you guys to remember, because every time whenever damage happens, your body's reflexes and with the nearby LD endothelial cells, they play a role in preventing your blood loss. That's what it does. All right. Now, yeah, I think this is all I have for you guys. I hope I made it very clear to you, guys. I hope I didn't. You know, so I'm so sorry about this last part, but finally I covered it. All right. Thank you.